Welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on lirmedia.tv in support of the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And my very special guest here today is a man who really I had heard so much about, though never actually met him, strangely enough, along the way in Irish dancing, and that is Michael Johnston. Originally from Ireland. Are you Michael?
No, I was born here in London. My parents, my father came from Dublin, my mother came from Cork, and they met here in London and they married, and I was born here.
But you've always been involved in Irish dancing. Tell me about your story, Michael.
I suppose, Mary, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and here in London, there was a huge number of Irish who'd come here after the war and in the 50s and 60s, huge numbers, and they settled in Kilburn, Cricklewood, Harlesden, Willesden, Kensal-Rise, and I was born into that kind of time in history. So we grew up where the church was very important to us, and schooling was very important to us, and we went through Catholic schools, and most of the children who I grew up with were, as with me, Irish descent, first generation, and that's the kind of part of time in history I grew up, where there was a great appreciation too by our parents of what they'd left behind, their country. That's where we went on holiday when we could afford to go back. And many of the children were involved in music, Irish music, and Irish dancing, and that's how, probably at the age of 8 or 9 or 10 maybe, I got involved in Irish dancing.
And you were with the same organisation as I belong to, which is An Comisiún Limerick Gaelica, and it's the largest Irish dancing organisation and the preeminent one in the world.
That's right.
You've always belonged to An Comisiún? You never.
I mean, when I was a child, that meant nothing to me. But at that time, we lived quite near to Kilburn, and one of my mother's friends, who was from the same part of Cork, said to her, "There's a young teacher teaching Irish dancing in Kilburn. Why don't you send Michael?" She had a daughter, and so my mother sent me. I don't think I'd ever seen Irish dancing being done before in my life, and that's where I walked into a hall and for the first time met Ted Kavanagh. Now, there had been Irish dancing schools here in London by people like Charlie Smith, who was quite an old man at the time, Mrs. Good, and Eileen Ryan was quite an old lady at the time. And into that came this very young, good-looking, handsome young man from Derry, who'd won the All Ireland 5 times, and he began teaching in Kilburn, Cricklewood, and Harlesden. He chose his places very well, Mary, and he had lines every hour. He had a line of children, and so I was 6 to 7, and he had about 40 kids, girls and many boys in the line, and then you worked your way up hour by hour, and so that's how it began. He said after a little while, could I come for a second lesson a week? I said, I'll have to ask my mum. I'm not sure we could afford. It was 2 shillings a lesson, and I said, I'm not sure we could afford 2 shillings, but anyway we did. And that's how it began. I enjoyed it. I made many friends, even at a very young age, because we were all from the kind of same working background. All very working class Irish, and all there really to carry on the culture that our parents had left behind.
And what part of Cork was your mother from?
My mother's from East Cork, in a place called Garryvoe, which is it's a lovely beach down there. It's 30 miles from the city, and it's in the countryside as well. So for at the seaside, the countryside, and for a child from London, going there, it was like going to heaven. You know, we lived in those days. Everybody seemed to live in just a couple of rooms, a kitchen and a bedroom, and maybe if you were lucky, you had a bathroom.
Yeah.
And as you were growing up, and so to have the freedom of the countryside and the farms and the animals, and for me, there's still an air of excitement when I go to Ireland and I look into the fields and you see the cows and the horses. I still love it. I love it. I was determined I was going to be a farmer from when I was 5 or 6 years old. And then I thought, well, I can't be a farmer because you need a farm. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll be a vet. But I didn't become a vet either.
Becoming a priest.
I became a priest, yes.
I'm interested in that for as a kind of, I suppose, a sideways glance at your life, because
yeah.
you were very involved in the Irish dancing, and then suddenly you, well, probably not suddenly, you probably had many years of thought beforehand. I know you would have had 7 years of training or thereabouts.
Yeah. My dancing kind of, I didn't know that I was going to be a good dancer. I went in 1959. I'd never been to the All Ireland. The All Ireland then was in the Mansion House, and Ted said to my mother, would you let him go to the All Ireland? And she had to think very carefully about that, because that cost money that we didn't have. And because my father had died when I was 4, and my mother was pregnant at the time with my youngest brother, and so I had an older sister and myself. So she didn't have that much money to send me off to the All Ireland. Although in those days it didn't cost what the money that it costs today.
It was relative.
Yeah, absolutely. So my mother, I remember, she asked a lady who played the piano for Ted, called Patsy Golding. Now, Patsy came from a big family of musicians, and she too was a teacher, an Irish dancing teacher and adjudicator, and her sister was a dancing teacher and adjudicator too, and played the piano at Feshes, called Sheila McAleer. And she said to her, what do you think? And Patsy said, well, why don't you send him for the experience? So off I goes to Dublin, and I won the thing. I won the minor boys, and I went back and a couple of years later and won the junior, and then of course in 68, 69 and 70 I won the first time. The senior boys had won the title from overseas, but Addy Boy for 3 consecutive years, and I was aged then 21, that in some ways was very enjoyable, but it was a pressure to stay at the top, and as well as that, I'd won the Great Britain and the London and all the other feshes over here, yeah. And people were kind of pushing me into doing my teachers, and it's a
natural progression for you,
yeah.
One would think.
Yeah, the world started the following week, and I had paid my ticket and entries to go to the world. And I said to Ted, if I win the All Ireland, do I have to come back to the world? Because in those days, the All Ireland was the world, and the world was starting the following week. And for us, it wasn't terribly important at the beginning. In some ways, I've had regrets that I was only 21 when I gave up. I should have perhaps gone on,
yeah.
For 2 or 3 more years, and won the world. And looking back, they would have been a great achievement, but I didn't. I took my teachers in Manchester the following few months later, and I passed my teachers, and I opened I opened a class. At the same time, Joan Long had been teaching in London. She was going back to Ireland, and she had asked me if I would take over her school. Teresa O'Neill was a girl who went back to Ireland. She was teaching in London. She's sadly dead now. She went back to Dublin, and I took over her class. And Eileen Ryan was this elderly lady. I took over her class. So I had enormous numbers of children. But when I was, I suppose, growing up, I'll tell you that, that's one strand of my life. But as I was growing up, you know, the church was very important in our home.
Yeah.
In a simple way. We, you know, my mother was very simple. She practiced her faith. She was a good, simple Irish woman. We served on the altar. Priests would come to our house. We were very familiar with priests calling in to us, and so I thought about the priesthood. But as I thought about becoming the farmer, or becoming the vet, or becoming a fire engine man or something, and I always thought, oh well, I'm not clever enough for any of that. And anyway, I thought the important thing is you need to making money and seeing a bit of the world and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I would tend to put it out of my head. And in fact, when I left school, eventually I went to St. Mary's College in Strawberry Hill, which was the teacher training college. And I studied to become a secondary school teacher. And I studied English and history. And I thought to myself, well, if I become a teacher in a Catholic school, then these thoughts about priesthood will disappear, and I'll be doing a good job in life, and God would be pleased. But the problem was, every now and again, these thoughts would come back. And in the school, it was a lovely school, St. James Secondary School in Burnt Oak, and they were Dominican sisters. It was about 10 or 11 of those. And I spoke to one of those, and I'd spoken to a priest here in London. And every now and again, I'd talk about this and thought, well, when I'm old, I'll do something about it. Meanwhile, I've got all of these kids teaching them dancing. I've got kids in school. I love teaching in school, and that seemed to be my life. And yet there was something missing. There was something within me that was missing, and so eventually, that feeling became stronger and stronger. I taught at school for 4 years, and then that last year I thought I should at least try and offer myself and do something about it. I enjoyed, to a certain extent, teaching dancing, but I was teaching dancing 4 or 5 evenings a week. And I was also teaching kids during the day. And I found it, even I was young, 22, 23, 24, I found it a lot of pressure. And the schools particularly, I loved my own beginners, but the kids that I took over who came to me from other schools, they expected to be like me. They expected to be champions overnight. And if they couldn't be a champion with the teacher that they had been with for years, I couldn't do that for them. So they were a bit of pressure too. Yeah. But anyway, I eventually I gave up.
How many children go into a dancing class and they want to bypass the easy reel and they want to go straight to the a set dance.
Yeah.
They want to be taught the downfall of Paris or the Kilkenny races.
Exactly. At least the mothers want them to. Mary.
Jimmy Smith actually talked about that, about a mother coming into his class, and he was charging €7 for it, and the child came in with €3.50. And he, after the second class, he said, it's €7. And she said, Mommy said, you get the full lot when I do it to music. So Jimmy put on the music, and the child hadn't a clue how to dance, and she was just running around, flaying her legs everywhere. And he said, now you can do it to music. And it cost me €7.
Anyway, I offered myself for the diocese here, and and I was accepted by Cardinal Basil Hume, who came here in 1975, and that's when I was accepted. And I studied at the seminary here in London. I miss the dancing, and I still do to this present day. I loved my involvement. And so I went on the year, 6 years it took, and eventually was ordained a priest. I've spent my time very happily here in London in different parishes, and have really, next year, next May, the 23rd, I'll be 40 years a priest, and I've enjoyed it very much. It has good days and bad days, of course it does, like a marriage, like anything else. But I think I chose the right thing to do, and I think I'm doing, more importantly for me, what I think that God wanted me to do. At the same time, you're never quite complete if you've been involved in the dancing world to the extent I was, and I hadn't done my adjudicator's exam. I really felt I wanted to complete the picture. So I went to one or two people here in London. Nora Maloney was an adjudicator who sadly died 2 years ago, and she's been a great friend of mine. And she taught me some of the traditional set dances that I either hadn't learnt or I'd forgotten. And one or two other people helped me too with the ceilidh dancing, because I didn't have a school. I remember going to Griffin O'Loughlin and being part of their ceilidh teams just when they were practicing. And I went off then to Dublin. I didn't to do my exam, and I was probably about 35 then, 36, and I didn't know anybody really except Myra Clarkin, and but the others were lovely to me. I think they thought it was unusual to have this priest stuck in the middle of them doing the same exam as they were, and so it was. I passed the thing, and I did adjudicate a number of things. They invited me the next year to judge the All Ireland, and that was a great privilege. Hard work, but a great privilege. And I adjudicated in the Great Britain here in England, and I adjudicated in the San Francisco Fesh. With Patricia Kennelly, and I adjudicated.
Patricia's coming on tomorrow night with me.
Oh, give her my love. She is a great old friend of mine, and
great teacher too. Great.
Yeah. It was lovely. San Francisco is lovely, and then I went to New York. And judged the Northwest, I don't know, Northeast Championships or whatever, and that was very interesting too. Hard work, but lovely. I met some lovely people, and when I look back, I met some wonderful people, and now I'm still officially in the book as an honorary adjudicator, and I'm happy to be so, and I hope maybe to retire one of these days, next year or the year after, and hopefully we'll get the chance to go to more feshes or just have a look, or even perhaps come back into adjudicating if I'm not too old and remember what I'm supposed to remember.
I mean, I think looking at you, I find it hard not to call you father, especially when
I've been Mary. I've been called lots of things in my life. I don't mind what you call me as long as it's polite.
Yeah, especially when you're sitting there with the collar on you.
I put the collar on because I didn't know you, and so that's why I put it on. I put it on. I put it on to impress you, Mary.
It's lovely to see, because I mean, I grew up with all nuns in school. All my teachers were, I think, apart from one teacher, all of them were nuns. And
where was that, Mary? In Limerick.
In Limerick.
Yeah.
I lived in England for. I was born in London. I was born in Wembley, but I was to go to Jesus and Mary in Harleston.
Yeah.
But Mum wanted me with the Sisters of Mercy, and she wanted to come home to Ireland because she was homesick.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my dad couldn't get a job in Ireland until I was 14, so I only saw him once a year, every time I went.
Yeah. Well, in those days, the the Convent of Jesus and Mary was a very good school. And that was the school Nora Maloney went to, this great friend of mine who went on to be a teacher and adjudicator. She was one of Ted's pupils too. And she went to that school too. And
what it was like, Michael, I'll call you Michael.
What?
What was it like being with Ted Kavanagh? Because I had a relative, I have a cousin who's Deirdre, who went to Ted Kavanagh, and they talk about this, this wonderful. I mean, I remember his teams. I was with Nolan's, and we
all right
in at the Worlds as well. I danced every year in solos, but I was in a team with them at the World, and we were against Kavanagh's, and I can still remember the costume. I can still remember the style of dancers, and apparently he was a tough teacher, a strict disciplinarian, and I needed somebody like that.
He was. He'd come to London at the right time and the right places, as I said earlier to you, and he had lines and lines of kids every hour. He was a terribly nice person, Ted.
Yeah.
He danced for an old lady called Nell Sweeney. And if you talk to any of the old teachers around Derry, they'll talk about Nell Sweeney. She adjudicated once when I was a child here in London, and she would recall you, and as a recall, she'd tell you to do a step with a rock and with a cross key on the left foot. And that was the recall. And that was the kind of thing she did. But my goodness, she knew what she was talking about. She taught Brendan de Glyn, and she taught Ted.
Brendan de Glyn.
Yeah, and she taught Lillian O'More for a while, and then Lillian and Brendan left. But I think Ted stayed with her until he came to London, and he won 5 All-Irelands with her. He was very tough teacher. But you knew that he was a very good teacher.
Yeah.
And if you were 1 minute late for the class, he would eat you.
I heard. But but that sort of discipline, you knew you were getting good results.
You really did, and he had the ability to he had a wonderful style, a real Derry, easy, natural style. Yeah. But he had the ability to bring out the talent of the individual, and the particular style that the individual had, and for all of the kids, he was able to pass on to a certain extent his own style. And there aren't many teachers who can do that. But at the same time, for us as children, and this is perhaps a little bit of snobbery, we thought going to somebody like Ted Kavanagh, we were a cut above everybody else. Going to fetches.
He was particularly special.
He was very special. He had loads and loads of winners, and he was special for adjudicators coming to London. I mean, we didn't have all the fetches, and we didn't travel too much in those days, but he really was special, and his steps were beautiful steps.
There weren't too many now like him and or Tony Nolan, and Matty Milady.
But he thought, I remember winning the Minor All-Ireland, and Nora Maloney had won the Minor All-Ireland Girls the year before, and Ted took us off to Chelsea to a studio to have our photographs taken. Now she came from Harlesden, and I came from up near Queen's Park. We'd never been to Chelsea in our lives. We'd never been to a studio in our lives. And that Ted sometimes did commercials on the television. We'd never met anybody who'd done commercials on the television. Ted always lived in either South Kensington or Chelsea, and he obviously had made a lot of money. And he used to go to Greece on his holidays. None of us had never met anybody in the world who'd ever been to Greece on their holidays.
He was really exotic.
So he had a tremendous flair, about himself as well. And of course, all the girls fell in love with him over the years. But he then, as Lillian O'More said to me, he liked a wee drink, and that's what Lillian said. And he died very young, 71, 72, and he got a stroke. And I hadn't seen Ted for years. And I went to see him. I heard he was in hospital, and I went to see him. And he put on weight. And I think that he was drinking most of the time. And that was kind of the year after he died. And he was 71 when he died. And he'd left it in his will that I should do his funeral. But at the time, I was actually in Ireland when he died. And I was in Cork, and I was trying to get to Derry, to where the mass would have been, although his cremation was in London. And I couldn't get the planes to join up, so I couldn't go. But about a month or two after, here in Kilburn, actually, where he taught dancing in Quex Road, we had a mass for him, and his nephew and his relatives came over from Derry, and the pupils came from everywhere, and it was a very large church, but it was almost full. And I said that mass for Ted, and talked about the great privilege it was to be a pupil of Ted's, and how much we admired him in our lives, and as children growing up, how much we were inspired by him, really, even though he was a very tough disciplinarian. And I don't think many pupils would say that about their teachers, once they died. He really was a very, very special teacher.
But the thing about it is, Michael, I think that, I know that nowadays it's more difficult to be a disciplinarian with children. I'm sure you've seen that down through these. But I mean, we grew up, anyone that actually had a nun in school, let's face it. I mean, I loved every one of my nuns. One of my nuns used to go in every day, she said, and pray to St. Michael just to get her through a half an hour of my questions. Get me through a half an hour of Mary Honan's questions, Michael, she used to say, and I'll do anything for you, she used to say to him. She used to talk to the statue, and she told my mother this. But they were disciplinarians. You knew you had, you could go so far, but they took over the role of your parent when you were in their charge. And the same with your teachers, your dancing teachers. Yes. I went to O'Rourke's, and I think I was sent home a few times for talking inside of the class.
Yeah.
I was just told, Mary Honan, go home. And I went home, and I came back again the next day like a child that was put out one door and coming in another, because I knew that they were good teachers, that they had your best at heart, that they knew they had somebody that was good.
We had respect for them, Mary, and our parents were disciplinarians. The police were disciplinarians. There was discipline generally in society, and that discipline, to most extent, has gone from society, and has gone from teaching now, even schools. And will certainly must have gone from teaching in dancing, because children or parents wouldn't put up with what we put up with when we were children by teachers and by dancing teachers or whatever.
That's all wrong, though. I mean, in the sense that there are some children, I think, me included, who needed to be pushed.
Absolutely.
Needed the teacher that was constantly, who needed to feel sufficiently, I think, afraid that if you hadn't practiced when you went home, that when you went into class, that you were going to hear about it from your teacher. The same in school. Now I teach in third level, and I'd be the type of, I practically do their stuff for them. I mother them completely. But I would be the worst type of teacher for myself, because I'd need somebody that I was sufficiently afraid of not having my homework done, or my lesson, or my Irish dancing, my practicing done for them. And I think a lot of children need that discipline. I needed that discipline.
No, I did. And I met, Ted would tell us off, even when we got to 18, 19, 20, 21, if he saw you with a cigarette in your hand, he'd be, and he smoked like a trooper, but he would really tell us off, and how do you expect to win smoking and things like that. He really was very strong on discipline. He didn't care what age you were, but we appreciated it. And I never ever heard, even as we were young adults within teams and that, anybody actually answer him back or leave the class.
Anybody answering him back. My God, his teams were so spot on. The lines, I can still remember the perfect symmetry.
He was very proud of his teams, Ted, and would practice those for the All Ireland. And there was a school in the north then. The teacher was called Mary McLaughlin. When I was growing up, she had amazing teams, but and she would win several years, right? But I remember we beat Mary McLaughlin's team, and Ted was so proud that we'd beaten one of his own crowd from Derry.
It was like
he never lost, with all of that flair that he had. He never lost his love, actually, for Derry. And when he had a few drinks, he'd always sing "Lovely Derry" on the banks of the Foyle. And you knew he'd had a few drinks by then, but he never lost his love for Derry. I think his parents died when he was very young, but he used to go back now and again to Derry. And when he had given up dancing a number of years, I remember he told me he went back to the Derry Fesh, where it all kind of began for him. And when he walked into the hall, everybody stood up and clapped him, and he was very, very proud of that moment.
Yeah, he was almost like, I suppose, to Irish dancers, he was like Jack Charlton, I suppose.
Yes,
was to the Irish soccer team.
Yeah.
Because when he came in, the likes of him, all those really the teachers that you really looked up to, the likes of Ted Kavanagh, and as I said, Matty Malady, the O'Rourke's, the Nolans. These were people with that were, I suppose, dug out of Irish dancing, if you like. Their whole lives just were sprung out of Irish dancing.
But Ted, I must say, he didn't like the direction that Irish dancing was going in, and he wasn't prepared to go with it.
In what way?
Well, he would never allow individual costumes. He had one costume, and if that costume wasn't good enough for you, there was the door.
Well, I actually know, because a cousin of mine, she danced for Ted Kavanagh in London, and she had her class costume, her green costume, all the time. And when she came back to Ireland, I was 2 years older than her, but I would have been small anyway. I'm only 4'10" now, but I had a beautiful solo costume, and she used to wear it when she'd come home to Ireland, and she'd compete in competitions here. And it certainly wasn't because her mother wouldn't buy her costume, because her mother would spend her last halfpenny on her. And especially when it came to dancing, because anyone who knew Rose Sheehan knew that she just absolutely lived, breathed, and ate Irish dancing. But Ted Kavanagh wouldn't allow them have a solo costume, so she had to wear her class costume in competition in England, and she wore and she wore, and then she got her own solo costume here that she had when she came back.
Yeah.
Here in
And
Ireland.
I think through that, he lost children, and because they all wanted their own, they all wanted individual steps, and some of the stuff that was coming in, I don't think Ted particularly agreed with in the particular step itself, and he wasn't willing to go with that, and that's why he eventually, I think, retired, because he felt that it was going in a direction that he didn't want to go in.
Yeah, it was.
And that's fair enough. That's what he thought, and he stuck to that.
He probably would have hated it. Now, and I love it. I mean, I love it. He would have probably seen it as being expensive now for children, and too individual in some respects.
I love it. I often put on the computer here and something to do with Irish dancing, and look at what some of the things they're doing, and it's absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful, and some of the set dances are lovely too. As long as they don't forget their carriage and their and pointing their toes and turning their toes out and things like that. And if they do it, and if they can do those steps in a natural kind of way, rather than a forced way, I think it's beautiful. But once they start to force what they're doing, and they lose their carriage, they lose their timing, and then they're not actually then in time to the dance at all. I think that then they'd be much better coming back to a simpler stage and doing that well. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. That's absolutely exactly how I feel. I mean, you can be dazzled sometimes with the footwork, and you can think somebody's footwork is just spectacularly amazing, and their rhythm. But if the carriage and if the feet if the back leg isn't being brought up enough, or if it's not being crossed enough at the back, or little things that at the very basics have to be right. If they're not right at the basics, they're not going to be right. And Jimmy Smith, when I say Jimmy Smith, there's a Jimmy Smith in Cardiff and there's a Jimmy Smith in Kerry. And I'm talking about the Jimmy Smith in Kerry.
I have met many years ago. I did cabaret for 3 months. Before I went to Strawberry Hill, I was off that summer, and I did a cabaret at the Great Southern Hotel for 3 months. And I met nearly all the Kerry teachers. That's where I met Pat Hannafin. And I stayed at the Great Southern, and I met Jimmy Smith, and I met the Irwins, and they would come to the hotel and see me, and they'd often take me out. I was only on in the evening. They'd take me off to all over Kerry. So I had a great love for Kerry, and that was the year they were making Ryan's Daughter. And we would go up to the set up in the Connaught Pass. So that was a lovely year that I spent for the 3 months in Kerry before I went to Strawberry Hill. Because I took a load of English books with me because I did English literature, and I was supposed to.
So did I. I did my PhD in historical English literature.
Yeah, but I thought to myself, I read all the books, and I'd be ahead of anybody else. So I lumbered all these books to Killarney, and I never opened one of them. I was having too good a time.
I know.
And I went into Strawberry Hill at a great disadvantage. We were also with Ted, to finish off Ted. He introduced us to things like he made Irish dancing. Before Michael Flatley, Ted made Irish dancing respectable. So we appeared at places like the Albert Hall. We were children. We'd never been at the Albert Hall in our lives. His team were on Sunday night at the London Palladium. It was unheard of for Irish dancing to be on Sunday night at the London Palladium. I remember we were on Blue Peter. I remember we'd go to Wales to appear on Welsh television. I was on a show with Dusty Springfield and Frank Ifield, the Dave Allen show. and you know that gave us opportunities that we would never ever have had in all of our lives. So as well as the thrashing out the steps twice a week in classes and going to feshes, it introduced us to a whole world that we would never ever have been part of. I think for us as pupils, we should be forever grateful to Ted for doing that for us. And I certainly am, and always will be.
Did you? You judged the Great Britain. I judged the Great Britain. I did the Great Britain 3 times, and the London and the British Nationals. And I loved every minute of it. Did you love? Yeah. Did you feel the same way?
I did indeed. I suppose the most special thing for me was judging the All Ireland. Even though it wasn't in the Mansion House, I was very disappointed, because for us coming from London, you know, maybe for people from Ireland too, the Mansion House was a very, very special place. And to go into that big round room there and the balcony around, and to actually dance on the stage there was very, very special. And it moved.
If you don't mind me asking, who did you dance with in age group wise?
Richard Griffin.
Oh, Richard Griffin.
Richard Griffin danced with me. Dan Armstrong danced with us, although he'd be older than us. But he danced the years I won the All Ireland, Senior All Ireland. He was dancing. Kevin Massey was older than me. I would look at Kevin Massey when I was a minor dancer and think to myself, I wonder if I could ever be as good as him. Richard Griffin was he was with Ted for a number of years and then left. Mona Roddy would have been the same era as myself.
Mona's coming on with me.
Mona.
Yes.
Mona would have been winning on the girls' side, as I would be on the boys' side. And Mona was a great personality too, and great fun. I remember being at Mona's 21st birthday party, and she in Dundalk. I'm trying to think who else now might have been. Tony Ferguson would have been older than us, 3 or 4 years older than us.
Would Tony Roddy have been in your?
Tony Roddy would have been a couple of years younger than us.
Yeah.
Tony, he'd be 2 or 3 years younger than Mona. So he'd be 2 or 3 years younger. So he wouldn't have danced. He would have been, you know, in those days they didn't have all these yearly age groups. It was minor, junior, and senior. So you went into the juniors and you were there for 5 or 6 years. You had to work your way up, and it wasn't a bad thing.
No.
I was in the juniors for I think 4 years before I won the next All Ireland, because you were up against some very, very good dancers, and you had to kind of go with it till you were good enough yourself. And I don't think that, you know, the yearly thing is very nice, but we were just thrown into the juniors or the minors was everything under 12, I think, you know, and it wasn't a bad thing. But anyway, the All Ireland was very special. When I judged the All Ireland, it was in Ballina, and it was a very bad winter. But it was very enjoyable, and I judged it with my goodness, from America. I said to you the other day her name, from New York. She was from, I think, Derry too. She was judging it with me. Oh my goodness, what's her name? I don't think she's quite well at the moment. She's
Fidelma Mullen?
Fidelma Mullen Davis. Yes, that's right. And of course, for years I'd heard of Fidelma Mullen Davis from Ted, and because they were great friends, they danced at the same time, and it was lovely to judge with her at the All Ireland. That was very special. But it was very special too to go to New York and to judge there. That was very different, but it was lovely.
In the States, I just love judging. I actually prefer judging, I think, to teaching.
Yes, I think I would too. I think I would too.
I get impatient because I love teaching children, but at some point I want them to actually get up on their toes. And if they can't dance on their toes, I just get, I just get kind of, I don't have the patience in that respect.
Yeah.
I understand how children who are good and talented don't put in the work, and then you have a child who may not have as much talent, who's such a hard worker, and you're thinking, if only God love you, if only you really had that child's talent. I love a child with a good work ethic, and then you
Yeah.
see some children and they just can't get up on their toes, and I just can't understand.
Yeah. Well, what for me when I was teaching, it was for the many children that didn't really want to be there at all. It was the mothers, the parents pushing them, and they'd be there in a line. They never bothered practicing, and they were miles away. And I used to lose my kind of patience with them. That week after week I had to teach them. But I enjoy sitting and adjudicating. I think as we get older, we get tireder, and these days you get huge numbers. So, for instance, I remember at the All Ireland there was in one competition, the girls, there was about 150 girls, and I would say it's almost impossible to judge well and fairly that many children, because girls dancing, particularly the reel, so many of them are good. And you can miss.
There could be at least 10
who are all good, but then there could be another 10 that you've actually missed out on because you're looking at all good ones on the stage, and you can understand how a adjudicator might miss out on a really good child if they've got so many in a competition. The hard dances are much easier, and that's
very hard when you have a whole load of children recalled, and you know in your heart that there's children who aren't recalled, who are very, very, very good children.
Yes.
But the competition is so high that, and there's only so many will recall to do their sets, and invariably there's some really good children who don't make the recall.
Yes.
By the fact that there's so many in the competition, and you have to, and obviously there's only so many will recall, and it's very hard. It's when you put on your human hat, or you put on your dancer's hat, you think as from a compassionate side, and thinking as a dancer. God, I'm just after missing out by one place to get a recall.
Yes, it was. I only have been to the world once in all its years, 50 years, is it?
Really?
Yes, because.
Did you not go to it in London? Did you go to it in London?
It was actually here in my parish. I heard the world was coming to London, and it was coming to the Hilton, and I thought, well, there's 101 Hiltons in London, and then I heard it's coming to the Hilton in the Edgware Road, which is 2 minutes. So I spent a whole week, it was Holy Week, of course, and the busiest week of the year for me, a whole week running backwards and forwards across the road to see the dancing. And Mona invited me to come. I mean, I could have gone anyway because I'm still an adjudicator, but she invited me to come to the teachers and the adjudicators reception. And that was lovely, to meet people I hadn't met for donkey's years. It was really
lovely. Isn't Mona lovely?
Yes, she is indeed.
Really
and she was in London a couple of years ago, and she came to see me, went for a meal, and her husband was with her.
Yeah.
And she reminded me that when she got married, she came to London and for her honeymoon. And she said to me, I mean, I wasn't even a seminarian then, I was a dancer, or a teacher. She said to me, would I find them somewhere to stay for their honeymoon? So I booked her into the Knights of St. Columba. The Knights of St. Columba had a kind of hostel hotel-y thing in Notting Hill. So I thought I booked her in there for our honeymoon. So a couple of years ago when I last saw her, we were reminding one another that she spent her honeymoon at a hostel for the Knights of St. Columba. So when she eventually comes onto your show, Mary, you'll have to say that you heard that she spent her honeymoon in the Knights of with the Knights of St. Columba in London. But that's true. She said, but you know, Mary, we were so innocent in those days. I used to go to Manchester, and the Grangers would always have a big party at the end of their fesh, Langley fesh, and they always had a big party. But the party, it was a party of musicians, dancers, singing. And we'd go to the pub and have a few drinks or something beforehand, but there was no great drinking. There was nobody drunk. There was nobody with drugs. There was nobody with anything. It was just music and dancing. And the same with Mona Roddy. I used to go up to Dundalk 2 or 3 times, and the house was full. The photo I saw now recently had Dan Armstrong was there, Sean Fagan was there, a boy from Glasgow was there, Tony Roddy was there, Moira Roddy was there, I was there. And maybe 1 or 2 other dancers were there too, and we'd all stay in the house. And they had a very small house in Dundalk, where we all were. God knows, but we'd go maybe to the pub beforehand, and we'd have a couple of drinks. Then we'd come back, and Mrs. Roddy would have made a load of food and sandwiches and things like that. And the rest of the night would be singing and dancing and God knows what. And it was just wonderful.
And isn't that synonymous? If you actually think about it, and you actually went across every single dancer of the time of the eras.
Yeah.
That was life in every one of their homes, you know.
Yes.
All getting together, you know, wherever they were in the world, they had that Irish, I suppose, that
Yes.
Irish sense of getting together and having a party at home, and everyone felt safe because you were around people you knew, and you spoke the same, I suppose, language of culture.
Yes.
Language of dance.
Yes, and that's continued on. That's come down into me now.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I don't have my own children to pass it on to, but it will be passed on to other people's kids. I know younger Irish dancers now. Sometimes I put on an Irish do here in the parish. We St. Patrick's Night now. I usually have a do here and I bring some dancers in and singers and musicians and things like that, and lay on a bit of food, and we have a great night. But it's a very simple night, you know. It's just lovely. Yeah. And those young ones now, I've done some of their weddings, and they can do the same thing, you know, just parties out of nothing, really.
Do you ever get up at weddings or up at parties and
when I was 70 a couple of years ago, I had some Irish dancers here, and they announced, of course, that I had been an All-Ireland champion, blah, blah. And of course, half the parish here didn't know that.
How many All-Irelands did you win?
5.
5. Wow.
Yeah.
You would have definitely won the world if you had actually competed.
I think I would have done. I think I was informed. Anyway, I didn't, with regret. So they made me get up and do a bit of a 3-hand reel thing with them. And I thought, oh my God, this is child's play. So I took off my jacket and I said, can you put a reel on? And I did a couple of steps of my own steps that I would have done years ago. And, but do you know something? I was going to Rome for a week's break. It was after Christmas. My birthday is Christmas Eve, but this party was on, my birthday is Christmas Eve, but they had the party early January, and I was going to Rome because I had a week off. And by the time I got to Rome, I was limping. So after all those years, I couldn't walk, and I had to go up the steps with my case. And I went into the reception, and they said in Rome, "What's wrong? What's wrong with your leg?" And I couldn't say I was out doing Irish dancing, so I had to say I pulled a muscle getting out of the bath. I said,
"Do you speak Italian? Do you
A
speak?
little bit, yeah. I've been learning it for years. I love the language, and it's very colourful. And I have a lesson here. I haven't done during lockdown, but for the last 3 years, I've had somebody come to the house here, a teacher, and
No, you can do it via Zoom.
I could do it by Zoom, yes, but my teacher cleared off to Italy as soon as I could have done it from there too, but I didn't. Um, I suppose at the beginning of lockdown, the whole thing was so surreal. We hardly knew what was happening when it happened, and it was quite difficult to concentrate until we got
How is
used to it.
lockdown affecting you as a priest
Um,
and as a human being? You know,
yeah,
from a personal perspective, and I suppose from a religious perspective, how
yeah.
you know it must.
I'm very. I like to plan everything, Mary. So in September, I plan for the whole year: first communions, confirmations, this, that, the other one, Advent Day. I have it all planned out in a diary for the whole year. Half the year, nothing happened because of lockdown, and it made me think. I was going to Ireland after Easter. I get a week off. I booked my ticket, paid for my ticket to fly to Cork. I'd hired a car. That came to nothing, and it kind of made me think. We can plan all we like, but in fact, those plans can come to nothing. And in the end, we have to learn to live with that. And that was an interesting exercise for me. Another very interesting exercise, our churches were locked, as you know. So for 16 weeks, I didn't have a congregation. So it was the first time in my 39 years of being a priest that I was a priest without a congregation. And I found that very, very odd. But when we opened up again, I didn't open up for the Sunday at the beginning. I opened up for just the weekday mass. We'd get about 30 or 40 people. I was like a nervous Irish dancer performing in a competition for the first time, standing up in front of a congregation, because I got out of the habit. I said mass every single day for the 16 weeks in the church on my own. And I got out of the habit of people being there. And I did a YouTube every week, but I looked around me pretending people were there.
Do you find when, now that you're talking about that, and I brought it up before with people, that Irish dancing prepared you without even realizing it for the priesthood, in the sense of being able to stand in front of a congregation and
Yes.
it had prepared you to cover up mistakes, cover up nervousness, to actually fight through your nerves and present this image of a confident orator standing in front of his congregation speaking, even from the first moment that you had to do that, because it must be very difficult for people who haven't had, say, the background of performance that you had, standing on a stage. It's not easy for anyone to stand on a stage and dance.
No, but we did it. I suppose we did it from when we were young children, and in the end, we did it. And I suppose that nervousness, unless it's some big competition, that nervousness leaves you after a while. And and I think you're quite right. Whatever, even if I was training to be the Prime Minister of England, having been in Irish dancing for so many years and going on to stages and going into concerts and going into cabaret, where I was having to explain to the audience what I was going to do next and why I was doing St. Patrick's Day, or this is a traditional blackbird or whatever, to do as a cabaret thing. I'd never stood on a stage and spoken in my life. I couldn't imagine I'd ever do that.
You were constantly being pushed outside your comfort zone.
Yes, and also, sometimes I'm invited to give talks and retreats and talks to priests as well. Quite often, I give talks to priests on the ministry of preaching, or how do we teach the sacraments and things like that. And I'm not afraid to sit down, even among priests, or the cardinal can be sitting there and speak. And I think that didn't come, that came because it was there from the age, I was being trained from the age of 9.
Yes, and do you think we haven't come out of lockdown as such yet? I mean,
No.
the masses still haven't started back. But do you find that since you came back, that there's some sort of a resurgence in faith, a kind of because people were forced out of going to mass? It's one thing saying, "Oh, I'm never going to go to mass again," or "I've lost my faith," or blah blah blah. You know, there's a saying, "There's no atheists in foxholes," and you know, I mean, we can say we don't believe, or we've lost our faith, or whatever. But when the chips are down and you're forced from the one place, you know, you want to get back there that little bit more. Do you find that there's a resurgence in faith since the lockdown, and that people are starting to come back, or that you're seeing any kind of a change for the better?
I think that there are several things in London. There are several people and elderly people who haven't come back, and that's why I've continued the YouTube masses to this very weekend, so that they can watch them there. And then I'm going off myself on holiday, so the YouTubes will end, because I think that it's nice for them to have some connection. They haven't come back because I think they're frightened. Yeah. Some of them have to get buses and trains, and that, at the moment, it's not very nice getting into buses and trains because there's a little bit of fear in that. But there, I think generally people actually missed the church from their lives. And I met many people that actually said, we miss the church and we miss coming to Holy Communion. You know, they actually missed it.
And the routine for a lot of
people. But receiving Holy Communion for many people, because you know, so often we take it for granted. We roll up the aisle, receive Holy Communion, and off we go. But I was unaware how much people would miss that. People I met in the street, and people saying, you know, we really miss the church not open, and we just going in even to say a prayer. For many,
but that's it. You know, it even if people never felt like, if they passed the church because it was open all the time, and oh, I'll go in on my way back, or I won't, or I'm not. The very fact that it was closed to them, that they can't get to a church even if they wanted to, which many of them mightn't have gone in the church for years, but the door was always open. That potential was there for them at any stage. Should you decide you want to come back to the church, you can step inside the doors. But that has been prevented from them. That has been closed to them now.
Yes.
And you know, that opportunity has been shut at the moment. And I think that's what for me, I think that's something that people would actually miss more.
Absolutely, I think too, because we've been grounded in that. I mean, that's been the practice of our faith for so very long, since I was a tiny child, and receiving Holy Communion and going to confession now and again and all of that, and suddenly that was all stopped. And even strangely enough, here in England anyway, I suppose it's the same all over, we've been told that at the moment the Sunday obligation's gone. So if people prefer maybe to go to Mass on a Monday or a Friday when it's quieter, then that's fine, and that obligation will be gone till at least the new year. And I've said that to some more older people, and they can come during the week, and they said, no, if we can't come on Sunday, we don't want to come. The Sunday obligation, we've been brought up with that all of our lives. perhaps not in a particularly good way. This great fear of missing Mass in case we committed a mortal sin and all of that kind of stuff. But I think we've just brought up that you went to Mass on a Sunday, and even when we went to Feshes, we would be at the All Ireland and that. But somewhere into that weekend, us kids from England, we'd find some church near the Mansion House, or near Father Matthew Hall, where we'd disappear in and be there for the Mass and go to communion and come out, and then we'd done our duty. We always did that. It never occurred to us that we wouldn't do that. We somehow fitted that in. And when I did my adjudicators, they were looking at me, and Eugene Hartnett said to me, will you be saying Sunday Mass? I said, yeah, but I said, I'd like to say it this evening, Saturday evening, because we had a very busy day of the exams on the Sunday. So I said, would you go around the corner, wherever it is, and find a church and ask if I can come round, tell them I'm doing this exam, come round later and say Mass on my own. And he did, and he came back, he said, some church, and they said, yeah, that's fine, you'll be there at 8 o'clock. And then, of course, then he went to Brendan de Glyn and John Cullinan and this one and that one to say that I was saying Mass, and it would be respectful if they came too, because they were the examiners.
And he also sent around a basket to them.
And then at the offertory, he started rattling a basket in front of their faces.
Good man, Eugene.
And then at the end, presented me with the basket. That was my drinks money for the evening. So I not only got the exam out of those examiners, I got a bit of money out of them too. There's not many people can say that in Irish dancing.
I am going to go from here now in Irish dancing.
I'm going from here in 2 minutes' time. I've got a marriage couple coming to see me, but on Sunday, I'm going to Cork for a month, to where my mother came from, to Garryvoe, and I stay there for the month each summer with my dog, who's somewhere behind me. He's gone to sleep.
What's your dog's name?
The dog, Finian. He's after Saint Finian of Moville. I'll tell Anne Carr. My dog's called after her Saint Finian of Moville. She won't be interested. A little Cocker Spaniel.
Oh, show him to me.
I don't know where he is. He's on the bed. He got fed up. Finian, come here.
God help us, they're so loyal, aren't they?
I'm telling you, I'd be lockdown. He helped me during lockdown.
Oh my God, isn't he gorgeous? Oh, look at the size of him.
There we go.
He's enormous.
Now that's Finian.
Oh my God, he's beautiful.
He's more beautiful than I am. Oh
no, you're both beautiful.
And then where do I go in Irish dancing? In a year or two, I will be due to retire from active ministry running parishes. And if I do retire, I'm not sure I will, but if I do, it will give me more time. I'm an honorary member of the commission at the moment. I would maybe ask or make a request that I could come back as an active member, because I would have more time now and again, maybe once or twice a year, just to adjudicate. And that would really keep my hand in. And I would be delighted if they said yes. Maybe they would say no, I don't know.
I'd love to judge with you sometime.
I would love to judge with you, Mary Honan. I think we'd have a great time, and we'd be picking out good winners.
Absolutely. They'd all have great courage and feet. What was I going to say to you? We must meet up when you come to Cork.
I don't know. Do you ever come to Limerick?
I'm in Limerick.
No, but do you ever come to Cork?
Cork is only about 40 minutes away.
You have got my telephone number, my mobile number. Give me a ring and we'll meet up. I'm in lockdown for 2 weeks. I'm in quarantine.
Yeah, you have to go into quarantine when you come into Ireland.
I know. But then for the following 2.5 weeks, I'm as free as a bird.
I'll be on to you.
Please,
Michael.
please.
And I hope
Now I've met you, Mary.
Pose too many difficult questions.
No. Now I've met you. Stay in touch with me. Stay in touch with me. It's coming back, joining that 40-year thing and meeting Anne Kerr and people like that has brought me in touch again with so many lovely people. And my Facebook went from just a very few people to about 20 people who are all Irish dancing teachers and adjudicators that I knew years ago. And now we're in touch again, because the Irish dancing world is a small world. And it's lovely to be in touch with people again. I'm very happy about that. And
I'll be back. I'll be back, as what's his name said, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. I'll contact you in a week and a half's time, and we'll make arrangements to meet up.
Please, and do send me. Let me have a look at your Let me have a look at the what we've done today.
Oh, I'll send that to you straight away that it's done, but I'll get Anne Kerr to come with us, maybe down to Cork.
Oh, wouldn't that be lovely?
You'll have a great time.
I better go. Take care.
Bye-bye, and thank you.
Bye-bye. And my love to everybody.
And back at you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.